Hello, I am Nate Beachy with Horner Solutions Group, here with a set of videos about the Horner Solutions Chart Recorder product. I'll show you how to use it, how it works in general, some of the features in several different videos. So over here at my side, I've got my chart recorder. What you see is the main trend screen. This is showing us currently the data 3 data over the past hour. So if I touch any of these data points over here, it will show that specific data point specifically on the trend itself here. And you can switch those between the last hour, the last 8 hour, the last 24 hours, and the last 7 days to see those particular ranges of time. You'll notice along the side here that the scale is from 0 to 5,000 here for the pressure data. I'll show you how to set up each data point with its own settings, its own names, its own units, etc., etc. You see an average here, and so for the daily average of this particular signal, it's been 221, even though it's currently 44.7. And then each data point, like I said, has its own graph, so that you can see that there. Along the side, you'll see a navigation panel. The second button up, the double rectangles, is your switching between different ways of looking at this same data. So here is a bar graph view of the same data. Switching again, you'll see another bar graph data, except for in a slightly different format, in quadrant format here. And then finally, the fourth way to view these is through the gauge objects here. Regardless of which way you look at the data, it's all the same data, just presented in a different visual format. To configure the data on the chart recorder, we're going to use the gear icon at the bottom right. By default, the configuration menu is not password protected. However, if you use the passwords option here and enable passwords for either the configuration menu or recordings, which I'll make a different video about, then you'll actually get a prompt up for a password to be able to get in here and change the configuration of this particular unit. But we won't mess with those. That's just how you can set those up if you want to. Back in the main configuration menu, if I go to channel config, this is where I set up each channel for the name of the channel, for the units for that channel, and how that channel is going to work in general. Now I've already got mine set up a little bit here as far as the first channel is set to be pressure, the units in PSI. It is a 4 to 20 milliamp signal, and it is coming from analog input number 1 of the 4 available. You can see how each of these channels can be set up separately. You can route any of the 4 analog inputs to any of the 4 positions on the screen. By default, analog 1 is in the first position, analog 2 in the second, etc. You can see data 3 here I have set to PT100, which is locked into either degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit, and that configuration is on the next screen that I'll show you. And then over here at the right, you'll see the intervals for both the data log and the averaging for each channel. The data log is currently set to 30 seconds for all of the signals, except for this second signal, it's set to 5 seconds. So there'll be every 30 seconds an entry in the data log files for data 1, 3, and 4, and there'll be a 5-second interval for data 2, each of those having its own separate data logging file, as long as the data logging is actually active. That will also come into play with recordings, which I'll get into in a separate video. The averaging interval, each of those averages that you see for each reading, will either show the average for the day, or if a recording is active, it'll show the recording average. For any of these, you can just press on, let's say, the name here and call it whatever you want. This is how I typed in my pressure using the caps lock there, and then P-R-E-S-S-U-R-E for pressure. And then I can also type in, that's up to 19 characters, and then the units can be up to 7 characters, whatever you want. I'll actually go ahead and change mine to be all caps instead of just the way it was. Change them to whatever you want. For PT100 RTD channels, you cannot really edit the units here to anything besides degrees Fahrenheit or degrees Celsius. Whatever you type in there is not going to take effect. That will be configured on the next screen I'll show you, which is, there's a shortcut to it here, which is the double arrows. That's the scaling configuration. You can get to it through the main configuration menu back here, or I can get to it shortcut between this and the scaling, between channels and scaling, with the little shortcut keys over here at the right. That's back to the channels configuration. So for data 3 here, since it's an RTD channel, there is only one thing to configure for it as far as how it acts, is whether it's going to be in Celsius or Fahrenheit. It's just a temperature channel. There is no other. For the other channels that are currently all set to 4 to 20 milliamps, the way the 4 to 20 milliamp signal comes into the unit is in a raw format between 0 and 32,000, which is why it defaults to those values. And you see the actual reading over here under the reading here on this screen only. So if I change my input simulator here to show different data, you can see the raw data has gone differently and the scaled finished data is also different. So that's where 0 to 32,000 comes in. On the output side of the scaling, this is what would match what the transducer that we're using would be set for. In this case, what I've simulated here is a transducer that represents 0 to 5,000 psi for its 4 to 20 milliamp range. So 0 psi to 5,000 psi between 0 counts and 32,000 counts. And that 0 counts is 4 milliamps, and that 32,000 counts is 20 milliamps. You can specify how many decimal places to see. The more decimal places, sometimes the more jitter, so maybe you want to decrease the number of decimal places, or maybe you need to increase them because the final reading is only a very small number to start with. So that is configurable for each channel. There is an option here for result less than 0 equals a negative. So if I turn my channel 1 signal way down here, I'm showing negative 1116 psi, which is probably not possible. That's because basically I've gone to 0 milliamps on my channel, I've basically unplugged it, or maybe I'm right at the very hairy edge of 4 milliamps, maybe I'm at 3.9 milliamps or something, and I'm slightly not quite at 0. Nothing's perfect in the world of industrial automation, so I would maybe never get exactly 0, and maybe I see a negative 52 psi or something, which again is not really possible. So this option here for each channel, in this case it's set for result less than 0 equals negative. If I change that option to result less than 0 equals 0, it will zero out that reading regardless of what the actual raw input is. So now I'm all the way down there at negative 7,000 on my raw counts, but the output of the scaling function is still going to be 0 and never below 0 because that's what I've set this option for. You can do that for any of the channels except for temperature channels because temperatures can go negative. Over here at the far right, you see the graph limits for each of the signals. Currently, I have my graph limits set from 0 to 5,000 for my pressure channel. By default, they're set to 0 to 100, so you can change that to whatever you want. For instance, on the temperature here, I have it set from negative 40 to 100. And those graph limits will be what you see if I exit out of here, escape from there. And then you'll notice that for the pressure, my y-axis here is scaled between 0 and 5,000 because that's how I have my channel set. And my temperature is scaled from negative 40 to 100. And that's the case for each of these main displays. Each of these labels, basically they scale themselves once you set those channels to whatever those channels are set. And that shows that way on each of the main displays. And so that's how you get some very easy data out of the chart recorder onto the screen so that you can monitor what's going on with whatever sensors you have plugged into the chart monitor. Stay tuned for more videos on how to set up the recording feature, how to set up the alarms, and how to set up the networking and accessing that data over an Ethernet network. I'm Nate Beachy with Horner Solutions. Catch you in the next one.